Well, Daniel, I want to thank you first of all for taking time to join me today. I followed you on Twitter and some other social media for quite some time, and I've been intrigued in terms of some of the work you've done. So thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, happy to be here, Carl, and always appreciate people that follow me around social media. It can be exhausting.
I would agree with that, but that's kind of the purpose of social media to some degree. But Daniel, first I want to start with just kind of tell me a little about yourself and Futurum Research, a little bit about that for the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the founding partner and principal analyst at Futurum Research. We founded the firm about 3.5 years ago. I've been in the tech industry my whole life. Actually, video UC and collaboration are my backbone. I was the CEO of a VAR in the Chicago area called United Visual. And then when I left that, I got into doing some consulting, started doing some writing. I wrote 7 books on digital transformation, did a lot of consulting with big tech, small tech, about generational. My first book was called Millennial CEO. So I was a tech guy talking about leadership. And over the course of the years, more and more tech brands started engaging me to talk about business leadership. My books on digital transformation really took off. And so this influencer movement kind of started to take shape. And then over the course of the years, the influencer and the analyst sort of became this one big melting pot. And so we evolved to go down the path a little more of research, advisory, and analysis. And then we leveraged the fact that we love social, digital. And so, between the books, writing on Forbes, writing on MarketWatch, doing a lot of TV spots, took that all together to create sort of the future of an analyst firm. At least that's how I see it.
That's good. That's good. So let's dive right into some of the kind of speaking of the future. With this whole pandemic and COVID-19, et cetera, I think most people understand the work from home phenomena has changed dramatically. And I think in many cases, people, that's going to kind of stay as the way they work. But I think there is going to be a new office environment when we go back to the office. It's this hybrid working kind of thing. What's your view of what's going to be different in terms of when we go back to the office, whenever that might be?
Well, I think we've got a significant window of time before we go back to the office. I think as we go back, we're going to see it sort of phased in. You hear the term new normal and next normal quite a bit. I don't think we'll forever be working from home. I do think companies have started to optimize. They've recognized, the companies have recognized that some work can be done from remote more easily than other work. But the social nature of people, the way relationships and businesses are formed, the way teams collaborate, I think it's going to be more hybridized. Hybrid's the rage right now, whether it's in the cloud or whether it's in collaboration in business and learning. We're seeing it everywhere. And I think we're going to see a shift towards more optimization. And that's going to take into consideration measures of safety, measures of managing people's anxiety and stress, because that's obviously been impacted by all this, figuring out ways to use data to optimize productivity, being able to bring the best people together. And by the way, these were all trends that were happening long before COVID-19. This was in process. We saw this get accelerated by 2, 4, 6, 8 times during the pandemic. The only other thing, I would add here is we will also see some returns to more normal. If I had to prognosticate on this, and a lot of people might not agree with me right now, but I still remember 9/11. I still remember how people thought travel would be just unfathomable and unbearable after 9/11, and it changed. It's different, the security, but after a few years, it just became normal, and everybody became comfortable again, and that's what travel is. And I think work will be very similar. We'll see some changes. We'll use more technology. We'll transform faster, but it'll be more subtle within a few years than it feels right now.
Yeah. In fact, let's dive in that just a second, because I want to get your opinion on something. You mentioned hybrid working, and that's a phrase that Poly has come to use a lot, not just for our own work, but also in terms of we think that's what's going to happen. You've written a lot about this notion of kind of seamless interplay in terms of between home and work, right? What's your thoughts about what's going to really be different from the home office, first of all, in terms of how people are going to worry about the management of that, the technology behind that, the cost behind that, and then how they're going to interplay back that into the office, if you will?
I think as the technology continues to proliferate, the actual ability to do work in either location will become more and more seamless. We're already seeing it in the best outfitted, our firm, while small, we have, 30 plus people, both full-time and contract, and we've all worked remote forever. Companies, as they scale up and grow, we've seen larger organizations that have been able to very successfully deploy people. There was some things that weren't fully thought out when there were large on staff. And that's not just like the tools for video and collaboration, Carl, but that was also, you know, the SD-WAN, security VPN, the accessibility tools, making sure that people's laptops and phones were powerful, that they had the connectivity in their homes. But that is all achievable. We can get really great speed connectivity inside of homes almost anywhere now in modernized societies. We're seeing 5G come into market. And so in certain places where maybe broadband isn't as fast, you're seeing 5G deployed into rural environments where you can get significant up and download speeds. And this is going to enable the home to really function as a fully fledged office. But going back to my last point, I still think the one thing that's being underrated in this whole thing is the human condition. And the human condition is we could have done conferences live for the last remotely for 20 years. There's been tools that remotely allowed video to be streamed. And in the last 10 years, it's become incredibly good and very possible to do, and would have been much more economically favorable than most conferences are. But people like conferences because they like to have dinner with people. They like to walk around and talk to people. They enjoy the camaraderie, the relationship building, socialization. Humans are social creatures. In fact, that's one of my biggest concerns in the wake of the COVID pandemic. Isn't just about the illness and the virus. It's been about, you know, people, loneliness, connectivity that we've been forced to do in this capacity. And by the way, Carl, you look great. It's great to talk to you over video. Yeah. But, you know, when you've had a chance, probably as we've slowly seen things unwind and unlock, to go and have a beer outside on a patio somewhere with somebody or have a cup of coffee, you do realize it's just not the same. It's great. Yeah. It's good. Yeah. And it's awesome for everyday interactions. And I love video. I've loved it for 15 years since I got into the industry, but I really do enjoy face-to-face. And I think that will bring us back to a more balanced hybrid experience than what we're really enduring right now.
Yeah, let's go a little bit deeper in that, Daniel, if you don't mind, because, you know, I read something recently where IBM talked about really, but people really want to go to the office for, they create these moments of serendipity, right? And you talk about people kind of what you just mentioned, they kind of crave these in-person meetings, right? And I think I'm kind of hearing the same thing, that for the first 90 days, hey, the work from home thing kind of worked, but people are missing this in-person. It's almost not only the connection, it's these, I call it kind of unintended collisions when you see somebody at the water cooler, on the elevator or whatever, and they kind of crave this kind of in-person nature. It's starting to really, you can see that and feel it. I assume that's what you're kind of getting to as well.
Well, think about it. I mean, so when we grow up and we move away from our families, if you ever do, you go and visit them every year. Now, there's been phones, we've had FaceTime, we have Facebook, we have all these technologies that basically could put you and mom in front of each other instantly. But why do you get on a plane 2 or 3 times a year and drag your kids to go see grandma? You know, it's because there's a different level of connectivity that takes place when you're physically interacting, physically engaged. And it's a much more, you know, seamless, open, a little bit less constricted experience that people tend to open up to. Like you said, you also mentioned the collisions, the water coolers, the random, I'm walking down to the cafeteria to grab lunch and I see someone in engineering and I'm in product management and we have a lunch together and we walk away and, oh, this great idea came up that wasn't even planned. We didn't plan that meeting. We didn't plan that conversation. We just happened to bump into each other. So there's the very kind of serendipitous type moments like that. And then there's also just the fact that, like I said, as long as this technology has existed and enabled us to be able to talk to and see visibly people we care about, there's always been one deeper level, that physical relationship. And I mean, this goes back to why we played golf all those years. And I laugh about, like, over the last decade, my golf for work has really suffered. And it's been because, you know, with constant connectivity, we just have more meetings. It's just unbelievable number of meetings. But do you remember the kinds of relationships you built from, whether it was golf days or, you know, going fishing with a customer or, you know, driving race cars, whatever it is that we like to do, you know, and that's gone. And I've also noticed to some extent, some of the depths of customer relationships have changed, and that doesn't add value. That actually creates more of a transactional nature. So how do we bring that back? And I think that's what those live moments were always really good for.
I agree. I couldn't agree more. Let's kind of tilt now a little bit more towards the technology. And you've concentrated a lot, some of your writings around AI. And I'd love to get your view in terms of how you see AI maybe impacting the technology, what we do both in the office as well as work from home. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, if you look in the collaboration space in particular, and of course, there's more than that in the whole work from home pod, but we've got a few different things going on. The first of all is we're going to see the acceleration of conversational. And conversational, the acceleration of that is going to lead to improved experiences, and it's going to push vendors to do better. What do I mean by that? Well, think about it. You combine this now with pandemic, with a little bit of the virtual cooties that everybody has now. Nobody wants to touch stuff. You walk into a room, you start using AI, it can do some automation and detection of who you are. You can talk to the room, it can identify. I mean, I love the demos of walking into a room and having one of your systems in place and being able to talk to it and have it say, hey, Dan, and I say, hey, call Carl. And it knows that you're the Carl I talk to the most, and it's able to engage me on that. And then, I can say, hey, turn on my video lighting mode. And it knows what my video lighting mode is. And it's just starting to become much more natural, much more engaged, much more touchless. And these are ways that AI can really work with us today. I mean, a lot of people think of AI of like robots walking down the hall, delivering our packages. And yes, there's some of that, the Boston Dynamics kind of stuff being done. But really what it is it's about data. It's about being able to process that, capture that, manage that, enhance it, enrich it, and then utilize it to be able to drive experiences. And in the workplace, it's going to be much more about people might not know how the technology works, but they often know what they want. This is who I wanted to call. This is the meeting I want to have scheduled. This was the important topics of that last meeting. Why do we have note takers? Why do we have a person just sitting in our meetings taking notes for us when you have content being recorded in a system that's incredibly intelligent that could actually listen to the conversation and extract based upon everything from inflection to emotion using video and AI to determine what's important and what needs to be gone back, or just listening to us say, hey, Carl, highlight that last few minutes that we talked about where we decided on our plan for go-to-market on the West region. So if you could pull that 2-minute clip out and it would hear you and it would actually extract that, translate that and send that to the West Coast team and say, hey, this is what we talked about today. Man, that would be effective. So that's kind of some of the ways it can just start to infiltrate our life is we just start engaging with technology like we engage with each other.
Yeah, I think you hit a number of things that we're working on at Poly around exactly what you just talked about. And I think I would even take one more, and it's around kind of the management and analytics that I think has become really more important. A couple of examples that I started to see, and I'd love your opinion on this. One is with social distancing and with COVID, rooms that now were originally designed for 10 people are going to put 5 people in it. And what you're going to see, I think, is the analytics to say, hey, did you realize there's 7 people in that room and our limit's 5? And they're going to alert somebody, let somebody know that somebody's got a problem here. And the same kind of thing in terms of this work from home. You've had it, Daniel, I'm sure. You've been on calls in terms of somebody's bandwidth's going on, somebody's dog's barking, whatever, in terms of how can I understand what's going on? Either A, put kind of acoustic fence around that, or B, in terms of, hey, your bandwidth is now suffering. I should alert them to do something differently because we're managing that entire environment. So I think there's another, we're going to see a lot of benefits from. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I think everything you mentioned, these are evolutionary utilizations of AI. We've been trying to better manage rooms for a long time. There's been software written to do this. And we've got new challenges that have been added because of COVID, because of social distance, because of spacing, because of enhanced acoustics, because of the desire for more intimate video, wanting the room to be able to work more effectively, which means you have to think about the camera's ability to follow voices and do it in a way that's not distracting for the viewers or the far side of the call. And having said all that, I think these are going to translate in really interesting ways to use cases beyond just meeting rooms. Your Poly's partners at Microsoft is doing some really interesting things with this technology and using it for IoT inside of like retail environments. How do you make sure people are socially distanced in grocery stores? So what I'm saying is what you're doing in these rooms is not only going to be done for collaboration, this is actually going to become part of that normal in a real good application for computer vision. Because I know it's a sensitive topic right now with facial recognition. So how are we using this information and data to create great experiences without being invasive in people's personal data and information?
Yeah. Hey, Daniel, let's turn more to some of the softer as opposed to the technology, and let's get your opinion on a couple things here. One is you wrote a book on millennials. You talked about that at the beginning. What's your thoughts on how they're doing versus other generations in this whole COVID environment? Do you have a view on that?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I can't speak for a whole generation. I wrote a book for one and I wanted to, but all kidding aside, I mean, the interesting thing about the millennial is even 10 years ago when I published that book, it's actually more than 10 years. It's crazy. It was almost 12 years ago now. I published that book and we were very young then. I was the oldest millennial and I was in my late 20s. So the younger millennials were still teenagers at that time. We're now I think we're the largest component of the workforce now is the millennial. I think that's now become accurate. And so it's this younger generation, anywhere from probably mid 20s now to about 40. And I think this generation it's got a few different complexities, right? So all the technology has become second nature to us. Even more so to my younger kin in the millennial generation, the ones that came up. I was the last college group that didn't have Facebook. I graduated the year Facebook hit campuses. And just imagine, they've been connected this whole time. Messaging, chatting, texting. They're changing the way businesses communicate with each other. We used to only email and call clients. Now we text and message, we Snap, we TikTok, we Instagram. I mean, this is changing the dynamics because this isn't only friendships. This is business relationships. We're talking to each other in social platforms. So it's created this really interesting paradox for COVID because for this group has largely been asked to create distance. And it's a very outspoken group, very passionate group, very politically charged in a lot of ways, very used to being able to incite opinions online and have opinions and are not used to anything punitive happening when they share them on any occasion for any reason. Now we're seeing the most polarized planet we've ever seen. I don't want to get into depth because it'll ruin this podcast, but we're seeing much more polarization. You're seeing much more passion coming out of voices. And that millennial group is certainly in charge of it. And I think COVID's been really tough. It's been tough on the psyche of young people who are very used to being social, very used to being untethered and unbounded. And we're seeing here that the social has kept us closer together, but anyone that knows a little bit about Dunbar's law knows that, we can only manage so many meaningful relationships. And so what's happened is we've got this plethora of sort of unimportant relationships, and unimportant maybe not be fair, but voluminous relationships that we keep in social and online. And what's happened because of COVID is we've been really left to be limited in terms of our interactions, those ones we talked about earlier, Carl, those really important, meaningful interactions. And I actually think it's not even just millennials. I just think humans right now are starving for good interaction. And I really hope I hope science comes along. I hope people find the balance. We figure out how to live with, or we fix this. But I think the millennial generation as a whole is much more like every other generation right now in terms of trying to, find its way through this unprecedented time.
Yeah. I'd like to close on this question, Daniel, and I'll give you some backdrop and context for it. Is anytime I see kind of just major fundamental changes, if I go back to 9/11, if I go back to financial crisis, in terms of now we're starting to COVID, I think there's fundamental innovation and disruptions that happen. It's going to happen because people are going to find new business models, new ways of doing things going to disrupt it. My question for you is, do you see either companies or industries, probably more likely, that you see are probably going to be more likely to be disrupted now versus pre-COVID?
Oh yeah, I mean that's a huge question, but I think you're seeing it in a whole bunch of places. And then the other question I think I could actually add on to your question is going to be, which are the ones that are going to have permanent disruption versus the ones that are going to have temporary disruption, right? So for instance, ride sharing, which was a hot next generation technology, has seen temporary disruption. And I think you're going to have to see a slow slide back to normal. But based upon shared economies, bigger urban areas, tighter parking spaces, smaller cars, sustainability efforts, I do think something like ride sharing will reemerge in a lot of ways. And it'll also lead to a next generation ride sharing model that won't be so much about using other people's cars, but actually sharing a resource where you can drive your own car. And you've seen zip cars and some of those. I could actually see some of those, for instance, picking up the momentum. I think that, we're going to see a really big disruption in terms of traditional workplace, which is kind of one of those things that, we've talked about and I think is really pertinent for this audience is I think when we come back to work, our offices will never quite be the same. I do believe that at this point. I believe companies have fully identified that there's at least, in some cases 10%, and in some cases maybe as much as 3/4 of their real estate is unnecessary. So that doesn't mean companies will never go back to work, And it
Right.
doesn't mean the commercial real estate market is dead, but it means that it's going to have to be rethought, repurposed, reapplied in order to recapture the hearts and mind. And I'll give you one other one that's really interesting is this might be a little bit of a contrarian view, but I actually think that the importance of retail had been largely minimized over the course coming up to COVID. And I think people's desire to go out and shop after spending 3 months never going into a store that isn't a grocery store has actually been realized that people love the experience of shopping. And so I kind of pondered the whole, why was Amazon buying Whole Foods? Why are they opening Amazon Go stores? Why are they investing in physical retail when they nailed the remote e-commerce, high margin fulfillment strategy? And it was because when people shop for exercise equipment, automobiles, mattresses, they do want to go into a store. But the business model has been horrible. And this is going to be that perfect time with inexpensive real estate, big tech companies with huge capital availability. It's why companies like you've seen Microsoft, Amazon, Google, they're humongous. You're going to see them actually find their way into some interesting areas where I could see, a company like Amazon getting into a whole bunch more physical retail businesses that are going to be experientially driven. Carvana has been another winner. It's like things a vending machine. So I know I could keep going, but lots of those kinds of examples where you're going to sort of see a current business model get disrupted, some temporary, some for the long haul. But we're going to see a different type of work, and we're going to see a different type of a city and urban planning that's going to come out of this for sure.
And then just to add on to that, I think two that I see that are pretty natural. One is healthcare, telemedicine, and one is education. Both will be very different in our lifestyles. But hey, Dino, I enjoyed the conversation. It was far-reaching. We covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. I appreciate your engagement today and your thoughts, and I'll continue to follow on social media because I find it very intriguing and always learn something. Thanks for your time.
Hey, thanks, Carl. I really appreciate having me.
You bet.